Chapter 22. By mid-April, life was getting back to whatever had passed for normal before the entrance of AJ in Eve's life. She hadn't seen him since she'd left Jeff and Lisa's. He hadn't called, which she told herself was fine with her. The outward animosity she had felt at being the last to find out the earth-shattering news had dimmed into a dull ache, although she still couldn't quite understand why he hadn't told her. Nonetheless, she had accepted the fact that they simply weren't meant to be together. The 2 times that Lisa had ventured out onto that limb, Eve had cut her off succinctly, and once Lisa had started work again, even that reminder had disappeared. In fact, she hadn't seen or heard from either Jeff or Lisa in more than a month. So, when the phone rang just after 9 o'clock on the 23rd of April, Eve never so much as thought about who would be on the other end. "Hello?" "Hey, Eve girl," Lisa said happily. "How goes it?" She swallowed everything else. "Great. I made it through my first official season change without any major screw-ups, so maybe I'll have a job tomorrow." Lisa laughed. "That's good to hear. We've been swamped. I pulled in this new hardware store account a couple weeks ago. It's been nuts." "Hardware? I didn't know you knew anything about hardware." "Neither did I, but I'm learning fast." "Nails, screws, tool belts, hot guys. Sounds fun to me." "Well, I've yet to see the hot guys part, but I've seen enough nails and screws to last me for a while." "I'll bet. How's Alex?" "Growing. He's almost 13 pounds already. You lay him on the floor and he'll hold his head up like those dumb bobbing dog heads in the back of a car." The reference, which should have been funny, only sucked the air right out of Eve. "I bet he's a doll." "He is. I wouldn't trade him for anything." Alone coiled around Eve as she thought about Lisa's life. Lisa didn't come home to an empty house that sounded like a mausoleum every night. No, she had family, people to count on her. Tiredly, Eve laid her head back in the chair. "How's Jeff?" "As insane as usual. He decided to hang a ceiling fan in our bedroom. About blew himself up in the process." "Is he all right?" "Yeah, he'll live, although he does still buzz from time to time." In the background, Eve heard his voice. "I heard that." "You were supposed to," Lisa sang out, and Eve smiled. "So, we were wondering," Lisa said, coming back on the line. "What are you doing this Sunday?" "This Sunday? Why?" "Gabe and Ash invited us out to Astroworld. She got a discount on some tickets or something." "Uh-oh," Eve said, smelling a setup. "This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain person trying to rope me into seeing another certain person, now would it?" Silence, and Eve knew. Well, actually, Jeff did ask AJ, and I think he's coming, but..." Concern raced through Eve at the tone in Lisa's voice. "But what?" Lisa sighed slowly. "He's bringing a date." Oh, it was the only thing Eve could think of to say as her mind spun on the words. "So, if you want to bring somebody too, that's cool," Lisa said quickly. "Oh, I don't know." "Come on, Eve," Lisa said, and there was genuine pleading in her voice. "I never get to see you anymore, and Astroworld's a big place. We probably won't even see that much of them." Still, the thought of being there with him being with someone else tore through her like wildfire. "Please, Eve, you don't even have to ride any rides if you don't want to." Huge parts of her wanted to say yes, but the mere thought of seeing him with someone else kept her from the word. "You know, Lise, I think I'm going to have to take a rain check on this one." "Oh, Eve, come on. I wouldn't have told you if I thought you were going to bail on me. Please, I'm asking you. I'm begging you." The ache tracing through her was sniffed away with one breath. "I really don't think it's a good idea." "But this isn't about him. This is about me, your friend, asking you to come and spend a fun afternoon with me. We can eat cotton candy and funnel cakes and caramel apples." "I hate caramel apples." Then we'll get you the candied kind. Come on, Eve. It'll be fun. Although it sounded anything but fun, Eve sighed. She really did want to see her friends again, and she was getting sick of looking at the apartment walls. I'll tell you what. If I can find a date, I'll come. Yay! Lisa shrieked. Then I'll call you tomorrow night. If you haven't found one, I'll find you one. Oh, great. There's a scary thought. Seriously, it'll be fun, so don't flake out on me here. Bribe somebody, blackmail them, hog-tie them if you have to. But come, okay? Despite the doom in her chest, Eve laughed. I'll try. As they drove to Astroworld in the little Civic, AJ looked over at Melody and smiled. She was truly a good friend. For the last 2 months, she had been unwavering in her quest to help him get over Demon Woman, her choice term for Eve. At first, he had tried to tell her that Eve wasn't so bad, but Melody insisted that anybody who could make AJ look so sad deserved the title. In his heart, he knew that it was he who deserved the term, but convincing Melody of that was hopeless, so he had finally given up. Man, it's been so long since I've been out here, Melody said. I think the last time was just after we graduated. Geez, that's been a long time. You feeling a little old over there? He asked teasingly. Old? She asked, wrinkling her face at the word. Don't ever use that word around me. My mom is old. I'm just getting started. Granted, we don't know what on. Hey, speak for yourself. I'll have you know I'm starting management classes in the fall. Instantly, the bravado fell from his face. Management? You? Yes, me. I talked to Farron the other day, and she thinks I'd be perfect to take over for her when she moves on in a couple of years. But to do that, I have to have a degree, so I'm going to go back to school. Soft incredulousness flowed through him as he looked at her. That's cool, Mel. It really is. I think you'll be great at it. Yeah, she said, crossing her arms. I do too. She sat for a moment and then glanced over at him. So, what about you? You planning on doing the search and rescue thing forever? He shrugged. I haven't found anything I like any better yet, so... Slowly, she shook her blonde locks. Look at us, a couple of slackers who've actually made something out of ourselves. Pretty unbelievable, I'd say. Yep, pretty unbelievable. Although she hadn't had to hog-tie him, Eve was glad when Blaine, the new guy in menswear, had said yes to her request with no more than a few moments of decision. Granted, she'd never seen him in anything other than a suit and tie, but the long khaki shorts and tank t-shirt weren't half bad. His dark hair and surfer boy looks weren't half bad either, although he really could have ditched the "aren't you so lucky to be seen with me" attitude. She couldn't count the number of times he'd run his fingers through his hair to feather it back, and by the time they got to the park, he had looked in the rearview mirror more than he had at the road. The sunglasses he donned when they got out to the car didn't help, but he had come on ultra-short notice, so she wasn't going to complain. Besides, what had Lisa said about not even seeing each other all that much once they were at the park? They said to meet them by the gate, Eve said as she readjusted the waistband of her white shorts, pulled smartly over the navy and white swimsuit top. The braid running from the top of her head down past her shoulders swung over her shoulder as she adjusted her own sunglasses. She looked at her watch. We'd better hurry or they might leave us. Blaine swiped a hand through his hair and reached for her hand. Hate to keep them waiting. You guys go on in, Jeff said as the 6 of them stood at the gate. We can wait for Eve. Yeah, it's silly for us all to stand out here, Lisa said, shifting nervously. She hadn't looked comfortable since the moment AJ had walked up with Melody at his side, and the longer they stood, the more distressed she looked. Well, I say we go on in, Gabe said. We could at least get in line for something before it gets terribly crowded. I'm sure she'll be here any... Oh, hey, speak of the devil, Gabe said as his gaze swept the parking lot beyond. When AJ turned, his heart hit the bottoms of his shoes. Of course she was gorgeous. That was a given. but the sight of her hand tucked firmly in RoboCop's made jealousy leap to his fists. "Hey," Lisa said, stepping over and giving her friend a hug. "You made it." "We're here," Eve said, returning the hug. Lisa stepped back and surveyed the medium-tall, well-built guy standing next to Eve. "And who's your friend?" "This is Blaine Donovan. Blaine, this is everybody." "Hi, everybody," Blaine said in a mid-baritone pitch. The others returned the greeting. "I don't want to be rude," Gabe said, jumping in, "but could we do the introductions in line?" They laughed and followed Gabe and Ashley into the short line to the gate. Eve was having a hard time finding a place to look that didn't include the lithe but rock-solid frame she had felt only in her dreams for nearly 2 months. His face hadn't changed, although the lightheartedness that had lit his golden eyes seemed to have dimmed since their last meeting. Without much watching, she could see that her hopes for his date to be someone he'd just met and asked out were less than real. No, he stayed close to her, his hand on her back guiding her forward, always aware and concerned for her comfort and safety, always the gentleman even at a lowly amusement park. Still, something in the back of Eve's mind said she had seen her before, somewhere. "I say we hit the serial thriller first," Gabe said from the front. "The longer we wait, the worse that line's going to be." "Oh boy, count me out," Lisa said. "I don't do roller coasters." "Don't do roller coasters?" Gabe asked, and then he looked at Jeff. "Why'd you bring her along anyway?" "To drive home," Jeff said with a shrug, and Lisa hit him upside the head. He ducked away warily. "It was a joke." "Not a very good one," she said. "I've heard Batman the Escape is awesome," Blaine said from behind Eve, and she jumped at the sound of his voice. "Yeah, I want to hit that one too, but I think that's like way at the other end of the park," Gabe said. He grabbed a map from a receptacle and opened it. "Yep, it is. I say we start here and work our way around." "Sounds good to me," Jeff said. "How about you guys?" AJ looked at his date, who nodded enthusiastically. "Sounds good to us," he said. Even the sound of his voice hurt. Eve put her head down and did her best to disappear. He was happy. She was miserable. Yes, life was definitely back to normal. From his place in line beside Melody, AJ watched Eve sitting with Lisa and Ashley on the bench beside the serial thriller. His spirit hurt to look at her, and yet his gaze wouldn't tear itself away. All he wanted to do was go over there, put his arms around her, and have everything be back the way it was on the mountain. In exasperation, he sighed and looked back at the coaster he was about to get on with Melody. Then, carefully, she leaned into him. "You know, a smile wouldn't kill you." Despite the ache in his heart, he smiled. "I thought your only specialty was video games." "Oh, you'd be surprised," Melody said, and he felt the soft touch of her hand on his back. She was a good friend, and he was glad he'd asked her to come. He would never have gotten through today without her. The previous coaster rolled to a stop, and they all stepped forward to get on. As she watched the coaster loop through a series of inversions, Eve's heart went with it. She had seen the private exchange they had shared, and it did more to solidify his place with his date than anything previous. "Melody seems nice," Ashley said from beside Lisa. "She's just AJ's style." Eve felt the silent conversation pass behind her back as a sad acceptance washed over her. Melody. Of course, that's where she had seen her before. "Yeah," Eve said softly when no one said anything else. "I guess they were more than friends after all." When she turned with a tight smile, the other 2 women were looking at her with sympathy in their eyes. "Well, there's nothing wrong with Blaine," Ashley said, trying to cover her gaffe. Reluctantly, Eve's gaze traveled back to the coaster. No, nothing was wrong with Blaine, except for the fact that he wasn't AJ. "I say we do the dungeon drop next," Gabe said excitedly, as they sat around the table eating lunch. "That thing that drops you off the tower? Jeff asked, as if it would drop you right into hell. Yeah, that looks mind-blowing, Gabe said. A little too mind-blowing for me, Jeff said, chewing on a fry. I don't do heights. Is that why your knuckles are permanently white? Gabe asked. Coasters I can handle. Dropping out of the sky? I don't think so. You should see this guy, Gabe said, not giving up as he clutched the table in front of him. I don't think he ever let go of the bar once today. I did once, Jeff said. Yeah, right. That first time when we took off. Gabe held up his hands and then jerked forward and grabbed for the table. Dungeon drop sounds like fun, Eve said, having gotten her fill of watching the others have fun without her. The shops that Ashley and Lisa went into held no fascination for her. All they had was overpriced junk as far as she was concerned. For most of the morning, she had chosen to tag along, waiting just long enough to not get on the ride before Lisa and Ashley found a store to go into. Then Eve was forced to sit and watch as the others twisted and turned their way to utter bliss. As she sat listening to them regale each pitch and turn, she made up her mind that she'd had enough of sitting on benches. So, when Jeff looked at her like she had two heads, she shrugged. What? How bad could it be? You're mighty brave all of a sudden. You wouldn't even ride the serpent, Jeff said, referring to the not-quite-kids coaster that Jeff had almost talked even Lisa onto. Eve smiled. You make the decision, the courage will come. She felt AJ's glance go over her, and she leaned closer to Blaine. Besides, we've been here 5 hours, and I've only spent 10 minutes with my date. Truthfully, she didn't want to spend much more than another minute with him, but the fact that Melody and AJ were practically inseparable hadn't escaped her notice. Cool, Gabe said happily. No more odd man out. As they stood in line under the tower, AJ watched her even though that was the last place he wanted to be looking. Her and Blaine. Well-built, tan, good-looking Blaine. He was a jerk. That much AJ could tell from halfway across the park. What he couldn't figure out was why she couldn't figure that out. Finally, out of sheer desperation, he decided that focusing on her, fantasizing about what could have been, or should have been, was stupid. It was over, and it was clearly time to move on. You know, this thing only holds 4 at a time, AJ said to no one in particular. What, are we going to draw straws for who goes it alone? Oh, no you don't, Melody said, clutching AJ's elbow. I've got me a partner. Me too, Eve said, grabbing onto Blaine. AJ looked at Gabe with a smirk. Sorry, big guy, you just drew the short straw. You would do that to me? Gabe asked incredulously. You would leave me to drop out of the sky all by myself? Yes, we would, AJ said, and the others laughed as the cage returned to a standing position. The other occupants stepped out, woozy from the ride, but laughing hysterically. He turned to Blaine and Eve and smiled as he swept a hand in front of him. You guys first, and he followed Melody onto the ride. Eve chose a middle seat and strapped herself in. I want it outside, Melody said petulantly when it became clear that her seat was next to Eve. It's yours, AJ said, instantly relinquishing his seat to her. However, when he realized who he would be sitting by, he hesitated for a moment. Then resolution slipped over his face. Is this seat taken? It's all yours, Eve said with a tight smile. When he sat down next to her, Eve had to remember to breathe. That tanned, solid arm brushed across hers, and she lost track of her anger at him and the space she was supposed to be occupying in the universe. The cage jerked to life, and she squealed in surprise. Don't worry, Melody said, leaning over so she could see Eve. If we crash, it'll happen so fast you won't even feel it. Oh, that's comforting, Eve said back. Just trying to help. It isn't working very well. This is nothing, Melody said as the ground disappeared from beneath Eve's feet. You should have been on the serial thriller. I thought I was going to fly right out of that thing. Sounds like fun, Eve said. "Hey, look, there's Jeff and Lisa," AJ said, spotting them on the asphalt now far below. He waved, and they waved back. The air that had escaped from her vanished completely the higher they went. She was up here, but she couldn't remember why anymore. "Is it too late to say I don't want to do this?" she asked. "I think you made that choice on the ground," AJ said, looking at her, and when her gaze caught his, the smile in his eyes was genuine. He winked at her. "You made the decision. Courage can't be far away." "Yeah, as long as I don't pass out before we get there." The cage chose that moment to hit the stop at the top of the tower, and Eve let out another shriek. She squeezed her eyes closed, willing time and space to stop right there. "I can't do this." "Sure you can," AJ said softly. The cage hit the other side of the slide and stopped. It was at that moment that she felt his hand gently touch the one of hers closest to his, clutching to the bar for dear life. With no other thought, she grabbed his hand just as the bottom dropped out from under her life. She screamed, she was sure, but in reality there was only the feeling of flying with only his hand to hold onto. Together they plunged to earth in one heart-stopping drop. And then she was back down, although she couldn't quite be sure they hadn't just fallen into some parallel universe. A moment at the bottom just before the cage sat upright, and then his hand was gone. "That was fun," Melody said. "Yeah, fun," Eve said shakily. When the cage came to a stop, she stood and nearly lost her balance getting down. Instantly, 2 sets of hands from either side of her reached out to catch her. "You okay?" Blaine asked, and when she looked at him, fog was all she saw. "Yeah, fine." She retrieved her balance and followed the others out. "How was it?" Gabe yelled at them from his position in the cage going up. "Awesome," AJ yelled back, and Eve couldn't disagree. "I want to do the wagon wheel," Melody said when Gabe joined them to try to decide where to go next. "We missed that one." "I'm going to do this one again," Gabe said, pointing at the dungeon drop. "You want to join me, Eve?" She backed away from him quickly. "Oh, I don't think so. I'm thinking the wagon wheel sounds much safer." "I'm with Eve." Jeff draped an arm around her shoulders. Gabe looked at his watch. "Tell you what, why don't we split up for a while? We can meet back here in an hour or so." "What about Lisa and Ash?" Jeff asked. "I'll see if I can find them when I get back down." "Cool," Jeff said. "Lead the way, Mel." As they walked through the park, Eve noticed how Melody stuck close to AJ, but she also noticed how he managed to put some distance between them. For her part, she put as much space between her and Blaine as she could. She didn't know if he had seen the circumstances on the dungeon drop, but she wasn't taking any chances. "Oh, AJ, remember the last time we went on Thunder River?" Melody asked, falling into him laughing as she pointed to the sign pointing to the attached water park. "Oh, don't," AJ said, closing his eyes. "No, you've got to hear this one," Melody said to the others. "We get on this ride, right? And we get drenched. Like, what would you expect on Thunder River? But Genius here had worn these white shorts that when they got wet, they became, like, see-through." "I didn't know they were going to be that bad," he protested. "He was like a walking Calvin Klein ad for an hour," Melody said. "You should have seen some of the looks he got." AJ nodded and smirked at her. "Thank you so much for telling that story." "Well, you set yourself up so nicely sometimes, like that knee-boarding incident." They reached the wagon wheel and got in line. "Now that one wasn't my fault," AJ said. "It's never your fault," Melody said, not slowing down. "Okay, we went out to the lake, and AJ's going to try this knee-boarding thing because he's crazy or something. So he straps this board to his knees, and they take off, and everything's fine. He's all doing all these tricks and stuff, showing off as usual. Then the guy in the boat decides to see if AJ can do this jump. They're flying across the water. Then, just before they get there, here comes this jet ski guy, and he was like yelling, "Ah!" all out of control and everything. They were fixing to clothesline the poor guy with a rope, so AJ lets go of the rope on the outside of the turn, and poof, he hits the jump ramp head on. Laid him out cold. Jeff cracked up as concern traced just under Eve's own laugh. "Why didn't you go around it?" Jeff asked. "Around it? I didn't even see the thing until it was right there." AJ laid his head back and flung out his hands as he closed his eyes. "Man, I was gone." "It took 25 stitches to sew up the side of your head," Melody said. "AJ doesn't kneeboard anymore." "I can imagine," Jeff said. 25 stitches? Did you go into the paramedic thing after that?" "No, actually, I went to L.A., AJ said without a trace of humor, but the others laughed even harder. "That makes perfect sense," Jeff said, fighting to sound serious. "Oh, hey, tell him about your pink hair," Melody said as the line moved forward. "Ugh," AJ said, shaking his head at that thought. "I'd tried out for this punk band out in L.A., but they wouldn't even consider you if you didn't get all wild and stuff. So I dyed my hair pink, put spikes in it, and wore all these dog chains and stuff. It was awful." "Did you get the job?" Jeff asked as he leaned on the railing. "No," AJ said in exasperation. "So then I had to go dye my hair back, only it didn't exactly work like I thought it was going to." "He looked like a skunk in drag," Melody said. "I have a picture to prove it." "I thought you burned that thing," AJ said. "No, I told you I burned it," she said, laughing. "You can never have too much blackmail." "Oh, great." "So, Melody," Eve asked, thinking back to the most embarrassing story he'd told her, "did you ever go skiing with AJ?" His gaze jumped to Eve, and his eyes said he knew exactly where she was going with that question. "No, I've never had that pleasure," Melody said, and the teasing tone had left her voice. "Too bad," Eve said, smirking at him. "I hear he's a wild man on the mountain." "Oh, look," AJ said quickly. "Our ride's here." "Oh, look, that was smooth, Knight," Jeff said, reaching out and collaring AJ. "You just don't want to tell any more stories." "You got that right," AJ said. The attendant opened the gate, and laughing, they crossed into a dim brown carpeted circle. Eve stood by Blaine, and Jeff, Melody, and AJ went to the other side. AJ looked at her and smiled, and she returned it with no thought that she shouldn't. She shook her head at him, and he winked. Then the door closed, and slowly the chamber began rotating. Slowly at first. Then faster and faster they went until she couldn't even see anymore. Her body was plastered to the carpeting at her back. The thing tipped up one way, then the other. Then the floor beneath her slid a full 6 inches away from her feet. When it slowed and finally stopped, Eve laughed at the dazed look on the 3 faces across from them. Jeff took a small step away from the wall and stumbled slightly as they met at the exit. "I'm thinking I should have stayed with Gabe," he said. "The Texas tornado," Blaine said, pointing up at the giant structure beyond when they exited. "Let's do that one again." He grabbed Eve's hand, and before she really got her footing back, they were leading the way. "We should come in April all the time," AJ said as they climbed the ramp to the entrance. "There's nobody out here today." "Yeah, but those clouds might have something to do with that," Jeff said, indicating the bank of dark gray clouds that had overtaken the sky. "Wimps," AJ said. They moved up in line. "I say we hit greased lightning again as soon as we get off here." Eve's head was already spinning, but she wasn't backing down now. It wasn't long, and they were led onto the ride. Melody and AJ took the car ahead of Eve and Blaine, and just before it took off, AJ looked back at Jeff, who was behind Eve. "Hands up." "They are as up as they're going to get," Jeff said, and Eve laughed as the ride chugged forward. She closed her eyes, praying this would actually be fun. Oh boy. By the time they got off of the Texas tornado, AJ was having the time of his life. True, he wasn't with her, but he was closer to her than he had been in more than a month, and besides the fact that Melody seemed not quite herself, everything was wonderful. "So, Melody," Eve said when they were standing in line for Greased Lightning, "you're the one who works at Galaxy Shoes, right?" "Yeah," Melody said in surprise. 2 years now." "Man, I've got to get back out there," Eve said. "I got this dress. It's like periwinkle, and I can't find anything to go with it." "Have you tried white?" Melody asked as the guys quietly bowed out of the conversation and into their own. "Yeah, but then all you see is the shoes. I tried black too, but that wasn't right either. I've been looking everywhere, but nothing matches it." "Periwinkle. That can be tough. Either it's too blue or too purple." Melody shook her head slowly. "I can't think of anything we have right off. You know, I did see one in the buyer's catalog the other day that I thought was really creative. It was tan straps, but the back of it was like solid, and it had all these cool color beads on it." "Oh, you do the buying then?" Eve asked. Melody shrugged. "Not yet, but I'm thinking about going back to school to get my degree." "Really? That's awesome. What are you majoring in?" "Probably management, but I haven't really decided yet." "Be sure to take some textile classes if you can. They'll really give you a leg up when you get out." The line moved forward. "I just hope I'm not getting into something I can't finish," Melody said, admitting that sheepishly. "Take the first step," Eve said. "One step at a time. You'll be amazed at what you can do. I thought I was toast when I first started. I wasn't exactly the best student in high school, but I made it. So don't let them psych you out. If you want to bad enough, you'll do fine." Gratefully, Melody smiled at her, and together they stepped up to the gate. Eve arched her back and looked up at the metal monster looming before her. "Aw, man, I can't believe I'm doing this." "Thrills aren't your style?" "Once it's over, it's fun. Until then," Eve made a face at her. "Well, then just don't look until it's over." Eve laughed. "That's easy for you to say." "What?" AJ asked from behind Melody, and she looked back and shook her head. "Girl talk," she said. "You wouldn't understand." "We were talking about shoes," Eve said teasingly, and AJ's face fell. You're right. I wouldn't understand." Eve looked at Melody and shook her head. "Men. They're hopeless." "Is my head still attached?" Eve asked Melody when they descended the exit ramp after the 360 loop. With both hands, Eve reached up and readjusted her skull on her neck. "I think it fell off on that backward loop thing." "How could you tell?" AJ asked teasingly. "Air doesn't weigh enough to notice." "Oh, funny," Eve said, sneering at him. "Your date is so hilarious, Mel. Wherever did you find him?" "I wish I knew. I'd send him back." "Hey," AJ said, trying to sound hurt. "Don't hey me, mister," Melody said. "I really don't think it's too funny when my riding partner is trying to figure out how the bar thing works just before we take off." "I was just asking," he said. "Well, next time, keep your curiosity to yourself." "That's hard for him to do," Eve said. "He is a guy, remember?" "Oh, yeah, I forgot," Melody said dramatically. "Okay, that could be taken a couple of ways, and I don't like either of them," AJ said. "Poor baby," Melody said, running her hand over his backward blue cap. "He's so mistreated." Eve shook her head. "Hardly. He deserves everything he gets." "Oh, yeah?" AJ asked, jabbing her in the ribs. "Say that again. I dare you." She tried to get away from him, but he was persistent as he started tickling her harder. "AJ deserves—" She beat his hands back, but he wasn't about to quit. "Everything— Mercy! Mercy!" She hit at his hands, pushing him away. "Hey, I said mercy!" He let her go. "You're supposed to let go when somebody says mercy," she said, reaching over and poking him in the ribs. "Don't you know anything?" "Oh, sorry, I must have missed that one." "Yeah, that one and 57 others." She jabbed him twice more for good measure. Aren't you going to do something about her? AJ asked Melody, who shrugged. Why? She's telling the truth. Ah, AJ said unhappily. You'll learn, Jeff said. I'll learn what? AJ asked. Never take them on more than one at a time, or you're done for. You tell me this now. Hey, you got yourself into this mess. Good luck. Jeff glanced down the park. There's Gabe. They strode up, and their party was once again complete. Well, you guys don't look too sick, Gabe said, appraising them. Sick? Us? Jeff asked as he swayed forward woozily. Never. A clap of thunder sounded above them, and Gabe looked up. If we're going to get on the cyclone, we'd better get going. Forward, Jeff said like a knight with his sword leading an army. Together, they made their way through the park. Just before they got to the ride, Melody broke away from them. I've got to go visit the little girl's room right quick. Now? AJ asked. Trust me, now's a good time, she said. Go on, I'll catch up. When she veered off, AJ stood in confusion for a moment. Come on, Age. We'll just be right over here, Gabe said. He looked over at Lisa and Ashley, who were following them. Y'all can even sit on the bench over there and wait for her. Oh, Ash, I see funnel cakes, Lisa said, steering Ashley away from the group. I guess it's just us then, Gabe said. I think I'm going to sit this one out too, Blaine said. That wagon wheel messed up my head. Chicken, Jeff said teasingly. It's called knowing when to take a break, Blaine said as another clap cracked above them. He waved quickly. Have fun. And so Eve found herself with 3 guys walking up the steps to the Texas cyclone, wondering how she had gotten here and why she hadn't had the presence of mind to stay on the ground with Blaine. Truthfully, she'd much rather be up here than down there, except for the little detail of the wood and metal-framed roller coaster twisting above her. I've got $10 that says you won't let go of the bar on that last big hill, Gabe said to Jeff. I raise you 10 and bet that I won't either. You are a disgrace to firemen everywhere, Gabe said, shaking his head. Afraid of heights? How did you ever make it through the academy? Willpower, Jeff said. Lots and lots of willpower. The attendant unchained the gate and backed up. We get the back, AJ called, grabbing Eve's hand and pulling her down the walkway. We get the front, Gabe said, turning the other direction and pulling Jeff with him. When they got to the car, AJ stepped in and slid down into the seat. Carefully, Eve slid in beside him as she pushed a stray piece of hair behind her ear. Riders filled the cars between them. She exhaled slowly to pull her scattered nerves back to her as AJ rubbed his hands together excitedly. This is great. Yeah, she said, barely breathing. Then the hydraulics let the bar down in front of them, and even if she had wanted to, she couldn't get away. Here we go, AJ said, smiling at her. Oh, boy. This has been White Knight, Book 2, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Never miss a second of the story. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel today.